Thank you very much, panel, for joining me. You've met Douglas already. Let me first of all introduce you briefly to Tracy Groose, who has got a stellar CV. Currently promoted last year to Chief Executive of the Dentsu Aegis Network in the UK. Got a really fascinating background. First of all, started with Nielsen, then at Whitbread, where one of the brands I think you were responsible for was Boddington's, which obviously made its name by the brilliant use of press advertising. Then to Starcom, and then to Naked as managing director, and finally to Caray as CEO in 2010. And then next to Tracy, we have David Wheldon. As Rufus says, one of the great British brands from Barclays. He's got a great title, actually, Head of Brand Reputation and Citizenship at Barclays, which I think puts him fairly and squarely in the right subject area for our discussion today. A really interesting job title. I think that probably the only person with a more interesting job role at the moment would be his opposite number at HSBC. But maybe they haven't got somebody with that job title, which is why they're in the mess they're in. David has a stellar career too, starting as managing director at Lowe Howard Spink, probably during its golden years, then global director of ads at Coca-Cola. I think the first Brit to ascend the 26th floor of Atlanta Towers, or whatever it's called, president of BBDO Europe, and then global director of brands for Vodafone. And he's been in his current job at Barclays for 3 years. So I'm going to move over and sit in the middle there, and we'll get going on the debate. We're going to start off, but I will ask you to chip in. Can I see? Yep. And if you do want to raise a question, just stick your hand up. We'll get a mic over to you and just say who you are and where you're from, so we know what particular axe you may be grinding. So, as Douglas set up the debate, you know, the automated trading offers the promise of the Holy Grail, the right ad, the right person at the right time. Yet somehow, as management consultants say, it seems to be suboptimal. And there are a lot of concerns about a lot of different issues, and we'll try and touch on some of those today. Let me ask, first of all, David here, are agency and brand interests truly aligned? I mean, some of the comments we saw on the screen suggest that they're not at all. And why might that be?
Well, I think the intent is alignment. Whether the reality is alignment is a different issue. I mean, I'm not familiar with many media pitches that happen at the moment where the client says, what we'd like you to do is give us a balanced view of how we should invest our media money, and we don't mind if it costs more. Most media pitches are driven by the desire to get costs down. This rests in a tension inside a media agency where there are people who will buy stuff cheap, any old stuff, and then there are people who are trying to actually understand what the brand is trying to do and do it correctly. So that's a polite way of saying no, they're not aligned. But the intent is pure, and I wouldn't want anybody to take away that I don't think the intent is pure, but I think it's a complex world that we work in now.
Are you taking some of the blame yourself then for, on behalf of clients generally?
Yes.
For driving the price down, and therefore, up to a certain extent, you abrogate responsibility for what you get?
I think a little bit. I mean, I do, part of my job is to help manage procurement internally. It's not to kind of go, it's their problem, it's not me. I mean, there's a commercial reality that all businesses in the world have cost pressures. All businesses are looking to get more bang for their buck, and actually that's the context in which marketeers must work. Now, you've got to take responsibility and accountability when you work with an agency and not abrogate it. And I do find lots of marketeers kind of running away from the difficulties with these problems, and they shouldn't.
Yeah, okay. Tracy, what's your view on that? I mean, you know, David's spoken about the inherent tension between the need to drive costs down rather than price, and is that manifesting itself on the things that people are saying up on the screen?
I think we are aligned. I think we all recognise the potential of programmatic advertising, and I think there are some myths around what it is that will be interesting to open up, because I think there's this debate about driving sales versus driving brand engagement, and actually the evidence now is you can do both. And I think in its simplest, programmatic is a bit of technology that takes the guesswork out of what media planners have been trying to do for years, which is, you know, finding the right audience at the right time and making, you know, the message resonate in the most meaningful way. And now we just have data and technology that allows us to do that better. So I think, you know, very simply, we're all in the same place, but we have a piece of technology that I think is game-changing. And I think it's game-changing because if all the numbers are to be believed, and I think the predictions are that if display is, if programmatic is 50% of display advertising at the moment, in 5 years' time, it could be 50% of all advertising. So I've heard those figures talked about, which is interesting because I then think it goes to the Wanamaker quote about, I've always known that half of my advertising doesn't work, I just don't know which half. And I think with programmatic, you will know which half works, because I think the potential of it is really proving the value of advertising and that advertising works, because we can track it and measure it in a way we've never been able to before.
But at the moment, it's far less than half that seems to be working.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Douglas's figures up there suggest that it's, you know, and I've heard all sorts of figures, 20 or 30% is actually all the stuff that gets through at the end. I was told it was a test, the FT ran a test and it tried to buy a load of ads on its own site, and only 18% of them appeared there. I mean, that's, well, God knows who their agency was, so they'd just be shocked probably, but if they're not. But I mean, that's pretty poor, isn't it, really? And so the gap between the promise and the reality is wide.
But I think we all know the reality. That's the good thing. I think clients understand the problems with it, agencies, the publishers, the supply side. We all understand the problems. This is growing so quickly. We cannot, all the governance that we need to put in place to manage it can't keep up with the pace it's growing. The appeal is because it delivers to the money men, because it delivers a sense of value and returns.
Sorry, to the whose money men? Your money men?
No, to the clients, to the point of the CFO.
Yeah, there's also the point about financial transparency, though, which again was raised by several people here. That there's a sense that the clients are in the dark about some of the financial aspects of the way this model works.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to say, I mean, our CFO, for instance, is much more interested in the reputation of Barclays and how we're driving the reputation of Barclays and are we driving proper customer service than is on how much it costs. Mostly because he's got minions of people that will worry about that bit. But it's actually, it's a fundamental point that, you know, what really matters, especially in the financial sector where we do have governance up the kazoo and we must get everything absolutely right, is this whole sector's got to rebuild trust. And it's very easy to cite the things where this goes wrong, because programmatic buying, like most things in life, when it goes wrong, you'll notice very fast, and it goes wrong on a regular basis. Without naming names, you know, the journalist from the Telegraph who kind of jumped ship last week based on what he thought his newspaper may or may not have been doing is the print version of the same thing. So, you know, I think it's a serious issue. And to raise something else, you know, one of the things, I am one of the sad people in the world that's read the terms and conditions when I bought something on iTunes, and I urge you to read them so that you understand what you're giving away, because I do think there's this issue where most people do not understand privacy and their data privacy and what the world of big data means for them as individuals. And this is, from a brand perspective, this worries me deeply, actually, because we've got to rebuild trust kind of one customer at a time, and anything that gets in the way of that is going to cause us problems.
Okay, I mean, Douglas, talking about, I mean, trust then, David, one of the big issues clearly for any advertiser, but especially for somebody like Barclays, is brand safety. Sure. So the chance that your ad will appear in the wrong place. I mean, how big an issue for you is that, and how do you deal with it?
Well, we pay attention to it. I mean, you know, when you work in financial services, you do get, on bad days, I go, listen, this is Barclays. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So we run a kind of paranoid model of let's make sure that, you know, everything we're doing is squeaky clean, and do we have in detail what's happening here? And when we don't have detail, we get worried about it. It's a bit like, you know, looking at who's in I'll do the extras in our ads. We did a very nice Premier League ad, and a fine gentleman from The Sun pointed out to us that one of the extras next to one of the main West Ham fans was a paedophile. Now, you know, you get that on a Friday afternoon, you go, what do you do? Well, we took it off air, we apologised, we edited it out, and we now have in place a phenomenal system to make sure that never happens. Now, dealing with the unexpected is tricky, and I think programmatic is serving up lots of unexpected things.
Yes, I mean, one of the comments that I think the guy from William Hill made was that it's blind buying. I mean, but everybody, you know, you and your peers would say it's not blind buying. But so what's the explanation for this gap between what some of the clients say and what you're saying?
Because I think it's how we're still in the early stages of programmatic, and where it's being applied is around how we can use it as a performance tool, using inventory that's hard to sell, and that's where it's naturally gravitated towards. But it's changing, and it's changing at a pace. When you have clients like Burberry, one of our clients, who I think are very passionate about their brand globally, have a reputation of every finite detail of how that brand is expressed through store, through online, is sort of analysed and looked at. And last year we did a programmatic campaign for them across 5 markets, but it was a brand campaign. So we looked at buying a homepage takeover on certain websites in 5 markets programmatically. And so that's very different. That's a very different era of programmatic. And also, I think coming through now, the latest pitch that many agencies in this room may be working on, the single biggest question the client has asked in that pitch is, what's the role of programmatic for my business? Not how do you charge, what's the transparency, the margin, all this sort of, they're important questions, but they're questions that we're all looking at. But I think now there's a recognition strategically the role it can play in the business. And it's not just about individual bits of technology, it's about evolving pieces of technology. And I think that's why we're seeing, in terms of brand safety, the emergence of private marketplaces, because that's a great way to manage exposure and where your brand is being seen. And I think what we're going to see is an evolution of how programmatic is applied that will address some of the very fair challenges that clients are sort of, are raising.
Okay. Is there anybody here got any questions that they want to ask while we're catching them? No, you're happy with us carrying on as we are. Private. What are the specific advantages of private market? So would you advise the newspaper, the news brand owners in this room to set up private marketplaces? Then is that?
It depends what they want. You know, the reality is how programmatic will work for different businesses depends on what the business is trying to do, what assets it's trying to sell, what brands they're trying to build. And I think what we're seeing is choice. And so, yes, some of our clients are looking at building their own private marketplaces. Those clients tend to be the ones where they've got a lot of owned assets that they also want to see how they monetize.
On the buy side? So
on the buy side.
On the buy side, OK. Douglas, what about, I mean, just get you in on the point of context here. As you made it very clear that context matters, yet it's, blind buying. Is automated trading really set up to deal with context, or is there a level of indiscrimination about the way the purchasing is carried out that mitigates against that?
My worry is partly that, but it's also just with how things are really measured. So I think a lot of programmatic is driven towards a measurement that says this many eyeballs saw this advert. There's a certain amount of demographic targeting, which I think is often very good, much better than we can get in other media. I mean, there's lots of very good things about it, but what it's not really measuring is the advantages, the upsides, the other softer kind of benefits
that
were captured by having the advertising, the marketing within certain environments. And I worry that not enough of that, or rather, I'm worrying in a sense on behalf of some of the brands that spoke to us, that they don't believe that is being measured.
Yeah, I mean, quite interesting. In Burberry, for example, the metric that they would want from their homepage takeover would be engagement, but also brand reputation, a long-term measure of brand reputation. Do you feel that you can actually provide that measurement?
Long-term brand reputation is that would be very difficult. to measure in that environment. Can we measure brand engagement? Yes, we did on that Burberry campaign. And I think the problem is looking at measurement in isolation anymore. So looking at brand and performance in isolation. And I think we've got to start looking at metrics that look at the two together, because the world is converging and customers and consumers don't see the world in the way that we see and have measured it.
And presumably for the likes of David, as more and more money goes into programmatically traded advertising, and for David, I should imagine a lot of it is about brand reputation, the advertising you're running. Apart from opening my current account or taking a mortgage, whatever.
Well, I will seal, if I may, Rory. It's always a delight to listen to Rory. I thought that tube map thing was bang on the money, because this is one of the problems. People only want to look at the efficiency data. They don't want to see it in context. And actually, when you get the time to show people in context, that's the good news, because I think there's another pressure inside companies. Burberry's business system has gone digital. So, of course they're going to be in the forefront of what you're doing, because they've changed their entire business system. Our business system hasn't really gone digital yet. It's on its way. But, until the business system goes digital, it's difficult to get the entire context to examine data correctly.
Yes, but at the same time, you're going to your chief financial officer or whoever it is who signs the check and says, we want more money, or we need more money for this. And he or she is saying, well, what's the impact of it going to be? Well, and you can't actually prove it. Is that
no, but what you have is when the chief financial officer says to you, I really like that life skills advertising, and you kind of ask him why. It's because people have told him how good they think it is. So all of a sudden, the context is his friends are saying, really like that advertising you're doing, and then you have a softer conversation about the money. And these things all have to be considered holistically.
Yeah, okay. But what I'm trying to get to, I suppose, is does Douglas, maybe you can touch on this. Do you feel that the measurement systems that are available don't currently lend themselves to automate it for people who want longer-term brand metrics?
Well, I do think that is a critical problem. That so much of the measurement is really tied to to massively oversimplify, the internet is almost like a huge transaction system, and so there's an assumption that the consumers are in that mindset at that, when they're looking on various different kinds of website, that actually it's about turning their behaviour on a particular page into a transaction. But when Coca-Cola sponsor the World Cup final or Olympics or something, they're not looking to see how many cans of Coke they sell the next day. That's not what it's about.
Yeah. They're looking for the long-term impact on how Coca-Cola is perceived. But I mean, can I just pick up on Rory's point here about, which I thought was fascinating, brands should think about a target context rather than a target audience. I mean, is that something that Barclays...
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm turning into a walking, talking Barclays ad. I don't mean to be, but
it's right.
The stuff
it's your best chance.
So, for instance, the stuff we're doing with Digital Eagles, where people have said to me, "You're a very odd company to be doing that." And I go, "Well, we're not actually, because our population is aging. Our people don't go into branches anymore. They like to do things online. And one of the problems is this aging population aren't necessarily digitally literate. So we'll train up our people in branches. They'll in turn train up everybody else." And then you get to things like, our Christmas version of this was, showing the emotional connection you can get through Skyping your grandkids.
Yeah.
And actually at the same time, that was our people training our customers how to do that, creating brand warmth, creating the ability for those people to then do online banking. So yes, the emotional context came first and the business context came second.
And what about Tracy? Do you feel that Rory's idealised nirvana of context targeting is possible?
I think we've been trying to do context targeting for years. So when I was at Whitbread, outside back covered for Boddington's, Stella Artois was the first beer brand to buy in films, not in Duff's there, in sort of news. And so context has been around for marketeers for a long time.
Yes.
But I think technology is such now that we can do context like never before. Never before. I mean, more of our advertisers now are looking at weather data. So being able to understand for British Gas the temperature and the role that temperature plays in how advertising is received and how effective it is is huge. You know, we're doing some work with Kellogg's where we're doing some stuff real time. And again, it was around context. They were doing a promotion whether you could get a branded spoon with one of the cereals. And all the work we were doing, and you had a big spoon and a small spoon. And everybody's going for the big spoons, and the client's sort of saying, well, I'm really worried we're going to run out of big spoons. We haven't got enough big spoons for everybody buying. We could pick up this insight through the real-time data and how we're working. And one of the guys in Isobar who were working with Kellogg's on the campaign said, what about if we change the wording to not big and small spoons, but adult spoons and children's spoons? Bingo. I mean, context, that's a beautiful example of context. And I think, you know, what programmatic does, it's not just a trading tool and it's not a vehicle to buy media more effectively, though that's where it started its life. What it also is a brilliant opportunity for us to really understand audience, signals and data. And actually, algorithms versus humans, it's not an either or. You know, the technology is allowing us to understand human behaviours like never before. And that's, for me, why I get excited about it. And I'm excited about the context and the opportunity.
OK. We haven't really kind of touched on the fraud issue very much here. And also, my clock is flashing on me. I'm between you and your coffee. So I just want to quickly finish on the fraud. In a year's time, if we were sitting up here on this platform, how much would we be would fraud still be an issue amongst the client community and the other issues of opacity and so on? I haven't even talked about viewability. We'll leave that for one side for a moment. Will we still be worrying about those things, and will they still be holding back automated trading from delivering the promise that you have identified?
Will it still be? I think it will be a problem, and I think the only way we're going to tackle it is together as an industry. And I think the industry bodies are starting to look at that, whether it's the IPA, whether it's ISBAR, whether it's, you know, Newsworks. And I think the only way we can do it is do it together. But I think, you know, I don't think it's something we can't tackle, and I think we're already starting to address some of it with the development of private marketplaces. But I think there are other things that are happening that will start to address some of it.
I mean, we're a bit late to the game, really, aren't we? Because, I mean, you know, the woman from Kraft is saying 75% of her spend is wasted. I mean, you know, there's a danger that the big advertisers will have kind of taken their money and gone elsewhere, isn't there, if you don't really tackle it? And David, is that...
Well, I mean, I think the industry would serve itself well if it under-promised and over-delivered. And actually... It's
never done that.
No, I know, but I agree with this point about the road accident, because you know, I can't sit on a platform and go, oh no, fraud won't be an issue. Fraud is going to be a massive issue. And actually the people buying need to be transparent about what the issue is. And if they're transparent, that's fine, because then you've got the right relationship. And it will get dealt with. I don't doubt it'll get dealt with. But I do think, you know, my urge would be to avoid this road crash, you know, under-promise and over-deliver.
OK, so, but you still think we'll be talking about these things in a year's time, probably.
Absolutely.
It's going to take a longer-term cure for that. OK, we, I think, are out of time, and coffee break now. If we can also all be back here in 20 minutes, which makes it about 11:30, would you just please join me in thanking Tracy, David and Douglas here for the panel?